AJ Lee is back in WWE, and I picked a great weekend to be away from the computer because we didn't do any videos here on the channel. I apologize for that. I had some family stuff, was away from the computer for most of the weekend, and, well, she's back. And we kind of thought that last week when we did our video where it seemed like at Clash in Paris they had teased the idea that AJ Lee was going to make her WWE return. We mentioned all the stuff kind of with Becky Lynch getting involved, CM Punk grabbing the sign from the fan. You had Big E and Jackie Redmond mentioning on the post show. There had been more teases kind of layered into things, and so we knew AJ Lee was going to return. Rewind to last week's SmackDown. I know you guys were very excited, as was I, when you heard the music hit, "Let's Light It Up," and it was lit up in Chicago on SmackDown on Friday as AJ made her return, took aim at Becky Lynch. I thought they set it up just in a tremendous way. And then we finally got AJ Lee back on Raw on Monday, and it did officially set up the match at Wrestlepalooza, just as we thought, CM Punk and AJ Lee versus Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch. And I think this entire thing has been so well done so far. We're only, not even a full week, I guess you could say, into it now. But so far, they have captured some of that magic that AJ Lee had during her previous run in WWE, and through all the talking points, I think one of the biggest ones for me is, why did AJ decide to return now, right? Why did AJ Lee return to WWE in 2025? Well, we said what a sort of historic year it has been for WWE so far, even with some of what I've called the creative lulls a bit, where it feels like there have been times where things just sort of continue and maybe drag a little bit in terms of maybe less than notable developments on the weekly TV shows with Raw and SmackDown. But you've gotten the big moments, and that's something we cannot deny, that this year in WWE there have been a lot of big moments. The John Cena heel turn, right? All that stuff, that's the biggest one, but there have been so many more along the way. And WWE, as we said, and they've said many times, go watch the WWE Unreal documentary on Netflix. It's about creating those moments. This is one of the biggest ones they've had in a long time. Look at all the social media impressions. Look at all this other stuff, which, again, shame on me for having stuff to do this past weekend and being away from the computer for the entire weekend of all the ones, because, man, you guys are watching and listening and talking about AJ Lee's return, as WWE has noted in the stats that they have put out that have just been incredible to see how many people have been sort of interacting and engaging with what has been one of the biggest returns they've done in a long time in AJ Lee. And so I think if you're looking at it again, the whole reason behind making a big decision like this for both parties, from AJ Lee's standpoint, look at the promo she cut on Raw, right? Talking about how she basically, as CM Punk did, had to get away from WWE. And we know there's more of a backstory there with Punk and everything like that as to why he left. But she mentioned, all the reasons as to sort of getting away to take care of herself. She talked about her mental health journey and everything, and sort of giving the words of inspiration there to anyone else who's kind of in that spot. And I think when you look at the journey of her, someone who, started as someone who clearly had high potential, but then just became such an iconic figure based on the entire presentation of AJ Lee, right? Just her charisma, just such a unique sort of approach. And yes, it's having a little bit of that crazy, right? That's the title of her book. Crazy is my superpower. Like, having all that kind of stuff and the way that it was packaged together to make her into such an unforgettable figure all these years later, for people to be clamoring for, again, just you saw the reaction, you heard the reaction in Chicago for how much this meant to so many people to see AJ Lee back in a WWE ring. And so if you're sort of putting the pieces together, it was a big decision on her part, but it was also a big decision on WWE's part. Because think about how many years running now we have been talking about the potential AJ Lee return. If you go back to one of the very first videos we did on this channel, that was in January or February 2024. One of the ones was, is AJ Lee going to be a surprise entrant in the Royal Rumble? Well, she wasn't, and we're like, well, the wait continues. Go back to the feud between CM Punk and Drew McIntyre, the feud of the year in WWE last year. There were several points where I'm like, hey, maybe you bring her back into the mix. They're showing the bracelet. It's got AJ's name on there. It's got Larry the Dog's name on there. I don't know if AJ's going to be there before Larry. There's possibilities you can work with. And so it didn't happen, though. But now there was a clear reason for AJ to return. We mentioned that in the video last week about how, with the way they've set it up, it wasn't really anything more than speculation on our part for the previous times that AJ had been mentioned as a possible return candidate. But now, with the way they set everything up, you had to do it. You had no choice. And so, because this is a company in the TKO era, and even before that, I mean, in the previous regime, WWE was about creating the big moments. It wasn't always about creating 5-star matches every single night. You guys know we use that phrase all the time. It's not always been that way. It's about the big moments, right? Hulk Hogan, back in the day, it wasn't always about the matches. It was about the moments. It was about the star presentation. And you keep going through that throughout the era, right? Whether the Attitude Era with Austin and The Rock and everyone else and all these others. That's what it was all about. And so I think being able for WWE to make a decision like this, which I would assume was a very easy decision, knowing how much and how loved AJ Lee has been throughout the years in her, decade plus that she's been away from WWE, you knew that this was going to be an easy decision on their part to come out and say, all right, we're heading into a potential landmark show for us, this first on this ESPN direct-to-consumer service, Wrestlepalooza. We decided to put this as our flagship show. Remember, this whole deal with ESPN wasn't supposed to start until early next year, but they said, let's speed this thing up, let's do it now. And so you want to be able to put together a card that is going to be memorable. You want it to feel like a WrestleMania type event, or at least you want to have the top stuff feel like things that you could put on a WrestleMania. And when you look at it so far, the ones we know, right? John Cena versus Brock Lesnar. That is a WrestleMania level top tier main event. This mixed tag team match with Punk and AJ versus Becky and Rollins. That is a WrestleMania type event given, the 4 people that you have involved in this match. Cody Rhodes versus Drew McIntyre seems like it could be a possibility. They added the Usos versus Braun. I mean, that also feels like, a match that you could have put on a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam or something like that. The Usos reuniting, and so you keep going down the line. Stephanie Vaquera versus Io Sky. They are putting together a tremendous card here, and this was something where if you're thinking of the timing of it all and why now, why AJ decides to return now, we've always said if you're someone who did sort of achieve a legendary status like she did in WWE a decade ago, you don't want to just come back to come back. You want to come back and do it the right way. One of the things that I feel like Stone Cold Steve Austin used to talk about, right? Everybody was always waiting. When is Stone Cold going to ever come back? Is he going to have one more match? And you heard throughout the years, you could tell it in Austin's voice, whether it was on his podcast, whether it was just in interviews elsewhere. When people would always ask him the question, like, when are you going to come back? You could hear it in his voice, hey, basically, I'll come back when it's right. Whenever it's something that, if you're probably Stone Cold Steve Austin, if you're one of these other legendary figures, something you can sink your teeth into creatively. And we know Austin eventually made his return to face Kevin Owens in what was the de facto WrestleMania main event several years ago. But I think that's what it's about. And if you're AJ, knowing kind of the mystique that you've created, again, that sort of legendary, iconic figure for so many people, your favorite wrestler's favorite wrestler, as AJ said on Raw this week, that I think is something you want to protect. And so for her to make that decision to come back in 2025 to say, I'm coming back to WWE, you had to align all the pieces together. And obviously, the feud between CM Punk and Seth Rollins, which has been one of the longest running feuds in WWE since Punk made his return at Survivor Series, it's been those two who have just always been combined in some way, shape, or form. They hate each other. That's the story you're pushing. And so when you add Becky Lynch into the mix, now you see that opening. That if you're probably someone like AJ Lee, you're thinking it probably isn't going to be better than this in terms of the potential creative idea to work with. Something like this that is such a high-profile match, a high-profile figure in Becky Lynch, who, again, has achieved, we talk about achieving heights in the women's division. AJ Lee, yes, got to a level where, like we said, how many stars after a decade are going to come back and get that kind of reaction? But for Becky Lynch, she got to a level of main eventing a WrestleMania, being at the very top as terms of the top superstar in the entire company at one point. That is about as good as it gets when you come to trying to figure out a way to make your big return. And also, you're doing it on what I said is a big show for WWE, another historic show in a long line of them this year, it feels like, where it's the first one on this ESPN service. It doesn't really get any bigger than this. And so all the pieces combine to make this work. And I think it's also from AJ's perspective. Like, you've seen the reports. She signed a multi-year deal, a full-time competitor, potentially. Think about all the ways that someone like AJ Lee, I'm sure, has looked at it and thought, hey, because I am someone of this stature, how can I get back to the women's division? Well, now you just go down the list. And you look at all the different women that AJ Lee can be in the ring with. Roxanne Perez, an obvious number one choice. You've got, as we said, there will be the eventual one-on-one match with Becky Lynch with the way they're telling the story now. Liv Morgan, that would be incredible, just based on, you want to talk about two people that are playing up sort of the crazy as the superpower. Liv Morgan doesn't mind playing it up that way. All right? Rhea Ripley, Io Sky, Stephanie Vaquer, like Naomi once she returns. Like, think about the different interesting combinations you could get with a Bianca Belair, with a Tiffany Stratton. Like, you just keep going and going. And because AJ Lee, who is just in seemingly still prime physical condition, I mean, unbelievable. It's just there's so much upside to do it now. And like we said, I think it really became a matter of when is the timing going to be right? You don't want to return just to return. You want to do it and have the maximum impact. Given how many people watched SmackDown last week, given what I mentioned in terms of the numbers of people who have consumed AJ Lee content over the past 5 days or so, clearly they got it right. All parties involved, AJ Lee, WWE, and everyone, I think, is going to benefit from this, not just for AJ herself, but the people in the women's division and all these other, I think, sort of storylines you can tie in with Punk and Rollins and Becky and all this other stuff. And so I think that's the clear reason AJ Lee made a return now in 2025 rather than all those potential times she could have done it before. This was the perfect scenario given everything that's in play right now for WWE heading into Wrestlepalooza. And I don't think they could have done it any better so far. And there's no way, I think, they could have gotten a better reaction than they have, because it has been pretty flawless in terms of the response to AJ Lee's WWE return thus far. You guys let me know what you think. As I said, I know I'm a couple days late on this. Had a very busy schedule, was away from the computer. Unusual for me to be doing that for an entire weekend. But I want to know what you guys think about AJ Lee returning here in 2025 and kind of what you see moving forward. What are some of your predictions for potential storylines, feuds, and all that with AJ now that she's back? And do you think that is the reason she decided to make her return in 2025 in WWE? All the ones I mentioned. You guys, as always, enjoy your feedback. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and let me know your thoughts on AJ Lee's return and why you think now was the right time for her to come back.